If I could have everyone's attention. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'm Carrie Troop. I'm with Faith Counts, and we are the organization that's hosting today's event, and also we've sponsored the study. I'll introduce our panelists, and then Brian will give his presentation. We'll have comments by the other two panelists. And then we have on each of the tables these cards. So as you're listening, if you have questions, if you don't mind writing them down, and then we can pass them to the front. Also, for those on the phone call, the operator will open the call at the end for you to take questions from you. But until then, you'll be on a sort of listen-only mode. I believe everyone should have a press kit. We've got information, bios on the panelists, information about Faith Counts, a press release, and other materials. At noon, so a few minutes ago, live on faithcounts.com/report, we have all of the materials as well as a 4-minute video version of Brian's presentation that I should point out is designed intentionally for young millennial audiences and for social media audiences. So it's a little graphically interesting, and that's intentional. So let me introduce the main author of the study, Dr. Brian Grimm. He's formerly head of Pew Research on Religion. He's now with Georgetown University and is head of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. And joining him is Dr. Ram Kannan of the University of Pennsylvania, who's done some really interesting work in this field as well. And also joining us today is Dr. William GALSTON, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Their complete bios are also in the kits for you. One other thing I wanted to mention is we have, if you are a tweeter, we have a hashtag for this event, and that is #ValueOfFaith. Thanks so much.
Yes, you'd probably enjoy the video version of my talk better. It's shorter and it's got all kinds of colors. And last night we had an event, and the graphics people have done things when I say you can actually measure these things. Then on the screen, the measure goes out, and if I say the globe, they'll spin a globe in it. So it takes like 10 years off my life as well. So thank you for coming, everyone. This study has 3 different estimates of the estimate of the contribution of faith to American society. The one that we consider the most reliable is the one I'll be talking about. So that's what we call the medium estimate within the report if you read the study. So the 19th century scholar, poet, and physician, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., once said that some people are so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. The study looks at the flip side, the earthly good of being heavenly minded. And when you think of the earthly good of faith, you may think of soup kitchens or clergy counseling people who are grieving, and that's entirely appropriate because these activities go on in hundreds of thousands of places of worship throughout the country every day of every week. But one question we seldom ask is, what's the value of all of this good work to the U.S. economy and U.S. society? Do we need to know that in order to appreciate the value of faith? Well, of course not. But in an age where fewer people are being raised in religious congregations, there's a need to show a more balanced perspective on faith than might come through the daily headlines, which are often focused on issues such as things of concern, clergy sex abuse scandals, religion-related terrorism, and so forth. So, but is measuring the value of faith is something sort of like measuring the value of love, something that Ram Kannan talks about. You may think that, well, that's not possible, but if you realize that love often results in marriage, and marriages often happen in churches, I can tell you exactly how much, let's see, my clicker is working. Is it on now? Okay, so sorry for that. So I can tell you exactly how much money poured into Center City, Baltimore when my daughter got married there a year and a half ago. So as we think of the value of faith, and try to measure it, the study's findings are that faith contributes one. Sorry, the clicker isn't working. Okay. Contributes $1.2 trillion to the U.S. economy. In perspective, that would make religion the 15th largest national economy in the world, ahead of 180 other countries in terms of value. That would also make American religion larger than the global revenues of the top 10 tech companies, including Apple, Amazon, and Google. It would also make it larger than 50% larger than the 6 largest American oil companies' revenue on an annual basis. So as we look at the value of faith, the first question is, well, is there something unique about religion? So if a recent survey by the Pew Research Center finds that highly religious people are significantly more likely to have volunteered in the past week, and to have given money or time or goods to the poor. So there is a very clear impact of religion on people's social and economic values. The study looks at 3 different sectors. The first is congregations, contribute about $418 billion to the total. Second are religious institutions, contributing about $303 billion. And the third are religion-related businesses, contributing about $438,000. And I'll describe each of these as we go on. So the first, these data are based on a careful review of national survey data on faith, as well as other financial data coming from organizational reports themselves. So the first category are congregations. So congregations across the United States number 344,000. So to give an idea of the scale of that, as I drove here, I passed several Starbucks. So if you wanted to find a Starbucks, you'd have to pass 26 houses of worship to find a Starbucks. There's 26 times the number of congregations as there are Starbucks in the United States. Okay. Sorry for the delay in the slides. Congregations provide 1.5 million different social and community services. Rather than just one, serving coffee, they provide services of all kinds. So these services I'll describe, but the 4 main categories where congregations provide economic value to society are first the congregations themselves that I'll describe, schools attached to congregations, primary and secondary, magnet effects such as the weddings, pulling people in and spending that wouldn't be there otherwise. And the last is individual impact, the value of lives being changed. So first, congregations, $84 billion come into congregations each year, and all of that money, almost all of that money, gets spent locally, hiring staff, paying electricity bills, if you're in the north, getting snow removed from the parking lot, and they purchase all kinds of goods and services ranging from flowers on the low tech to high tech video equipment on the upper end. Schools attached to congregations they employ 420,000 full-time staff, and they educate 4.5 million students each year. By way of perspective, that's the same population as either Ireland or New Zealand in total. In addition to schools, there's also the magnet effects, the wedding effect, and another is that 120,000 congregations report that they are viewed by people as a center for viewing art and architecture. By comparison, that's almost 4 times as many museums as there are in the entire United States, and these are some of the amazing pieces of architecture of all faiths in the United States. And finally, individual impact. perhaps the thing that we think of first when we think of the value of faith. And this comes in various ways. Congregations operate 130,000 addiction recovery programs, such as at Saddleback Church, their Celebrate Recovery program. And also, they operate 120,000 employment programs or employment centers. For instance, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons, operate an employment center in each of their stakes, which is a collection of about 12 congregations. Some of these are a bit surprising. There are 26,000 HIV/AIDS ministries carried out by local churches. One that just happened this past weekend on 9/11. The First Ladies of Chicago, these are the pastors' wives in Chicago, in 50 different churches and congregations, hosted health screenings in the churches for the community and members, including HIV/AIDS screening, and that was co-sponsored by Walgreens as well. Can we go back? Sorry. Yeah, good. And then perhaps one of the most significant impacts of congregations is that 320,000 congregations help recruit volunteers for programs outside of their congregation, such as for the American Red Cross, United Way, and Big Brothers and Big Sisters. So rather than congregations being something focused in on themselves, congregations are really community hubs, which then are reaching out to neighbors, friends, and other organizations. According to Pew Research, the latest numbers are there are 187 million religiously affiliated adults, not counting children, in the United States. I'll give you the story of just one of these people who was impacted by faith-based schooling. St. Benedict's Prep Schools in Newark, New Jersey. It's in a neighborhood where the public schools are having a hard time just getting kids graduated or keeping them out of gangs and out of prison. Well, the prep school has a 95% college admission rate, many to Ivy League schools. And one of the students that graduated from there is Uriel Burwell, who went on to Drew University and then thought of what he should do in life, and he thought he needs to come back to the same neighborhood where he was educated and help develop the community. He's helped build 30 affordable houses. He's done a whole renovation of the community to promote more affordable housing, and he's brought in $3 million worth of investment. So that's how sort of the cycle works, where you can influence one individual who then continues and brings not only spiritual change, you could say, but economic and social change to their communities as well. The second category of contribution is coming from religious institutions. These include charities, for instance, the Knights of Columbus, with their 1.5 million members across the U.S., stand ready to volunteer if there's a disaster or any other types of needs. There's also healthcare. The Adventist healthcare system, for instance, employs 47,000 people and has 48 hospitals across the nation. And it also happens to be where one of my 4 kids was born. So they're not only attending to the health needs, but also ministering to spiritual needs. And then across the United States, there's numerous colleges and universities, institutions of higher education that are religiously affiliated, including Brandeis University, which is affiliated, is a Jewish-based university. Georgetown, where I do some of my research, is a Jesuit university, Catholic university here in Washington. The list goes on. Pretty much every town, city, every major town has faith-based institutions in them. Other charities, I'll just mention one other, Islamic Relief, recently with the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. They hired 20 staff to help distribute 135,000 gallons of clean drinking water to alleviate the problems in Flint. Well, I could go on with many more examples, but I'm going to jump to the last category that we measured in the report, which is business. Religion-related business contributes $438 billion to the U.S. economy, And there's two categories, a smaller one, which is faith-based business, such as the halal and kosher food industries, but also religious media like EWTN, the Catholic Network, Christian Broadcasting Network, and others are faith-based businesses. But the larger category are, you could call them faith-friendly businesses, or businesses that welcome and don't push faith outside the door when you come into the workplace. One of these is Tyson's Food. At Tyson Food, they hire a force of chaplains to minister to the employees, regardless of their faith.
One of the core values that we have is it says we strive to be a faith-friendly company. It doesn't say we're a faith-based company. It says we're faith-friendly because we got a lot of different faiths in our company. What it means to me is just a reflection of who we are. It's a reflection of our core values. It's a reflection of us striving to take care of each other. So our chaplaincy program is really an extension of our core values, where we're here to help, support, nurture, and encourage. The chaplain's able to step in and into a difficult situation and to provide comfort and thought and counseling. And that's what our chaplains do.
In addition to businesses, there are numerous faith-based business associations. For instance, one is C12. An association of Christian CEOs. They have 2,500 CEOs, some of them with billion-dollar companies, where they're looking to bring in faith into their management and the ethics of their company. And the last example I'll give of a business is a little bit maybe a surprising one. It's an American CEO who has left his job in America to start a company in Mozambique. The company not only brings economic well-being to the really impoverished nation of Mozambique, but it also, through their products, stocks the shelves of America's major food markets, including Wegmans, Giant, Whole Foods, and it's coming soon to DEB and Texas. Here's Don Larson's story.
While it used to be a worldwide leader in cashew production, Mozambique is now one of the world's poorest nations. Banking policies and civil war led to extreme poverty across religious and cultural lines, leaving many widowed mothers and over 1.6 million orphans throughout the country. Don Larson, former vice president at the Hershey Company and founder and CEO of the Sunshine Nut Company, is working to revive Mozambique's economy and reverse the trend in broken families. Inspired by his faith and the belief that companies can have a profound impact, Don is working with people of all faiths to transform lives by helping provide jobs for over 50,000 people and by donating 90% of his profits to support orphans, empower farmers, and strengthen the local infrastructure, helping to bring interfaith understanding and peace.
So one of the goals of social science is to bring to light things that we wouldn't otherwise notice, such as this amazing story of Don Larson, who gave up all of his toys of life as a top executive in the U.S. to start a business that has the philosophy of what he calls a reverse 90% tithe. So 90% of all his profits go back to Mozambique. And there's a lot of profits because they cook, roast, and package all of the nuts in Mozambique and then ship them to a facility that then distributes them all across the United States. So even without knowing it, many people, many American consumers are participating in a faith-inspired business as they consume these nuts. Well, this is, again, just to wrap up, we have $1.2 trillion annually added or contributed to U.S. society and the economy from the different categories that we've talked about, from the congregations themselves, from religious institutions and from businesses. And as Carrie mentioned, the report, a link to the report and other materials like the video and the handout that you have are available at Faith Counts. So now, if I could invite my colleagues to come forward and share their reactions, and then we'll open for questions after that. Who would like to go first? Okay, Ron.
If you don't mind, I'll stand and talk. So I want first to emphasize that, contrary to many people who do work in this field, I'm not a religious person. People ask me, I consider myself secular. I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. My interest is the social science of it and knowing what is going on. Lots of people in my field study the negative sides of religion. And if you look at the media, some of you guys in the room, it's much more interesting to write an article about the clergy abusing something than about the clergy caring for the community. So for the last 25 years, I'm interested in the positive side of religion. What is it that religion does that is good for society? So I did lots of work that I'm not going to cover here, but one of the things that is problematic for many clergy, many religious leaders that I met, is to show that they are relevant for the communities. When I ask them, and when you ask them, what is it that you do? They usually come up and say, we instill good values. They do. And then they say we do good things for our members and for our neighbors. And when you ask them what, they give you anecdote. They say, here is a family that without our intervention would be in deep trouble. Thanks to our intervention, they're doing so much better, and there's a future for this family. And there it usually stops. There is no going further and said, and the value of our work is such and such. And that's something that troubled me for a while. John Galbraith is quoted for saying, if you don't count it, it ain't count. In other words, if you don't put a number to it, and you go and say, this is my value, you don't have a value. Or you don't have a real value that you can talk about. So Brian Grimm did something that is very impressive. He put a number on religion in the United States. He used a method that we call valuation. Valuation is a field that tries to give a value for something that you don't have a real market clear value. I can tell you how much this blazer cost. That's very simple. You go to stores, you find the value. Everybody knows it goes between that and that. But there are many other things that are very difficult to measure. So you already stole my example about love, so I will not repeat it. I did give you credit. Thank you. But if you want to buy a company, you don't only look at last year's profit. That will give you only that little about the value of the company. You'd like to know if they have patent, if they have assets, if they have property, if they have reputation, if they have relevant workforce, if they have future contract. Putting it all together in a price is a science in and of itself. It is even way more difficult to do it in a field like religion. In the field of companies, there are economists who specialize in valuation. In social science, in religion, it's almost, no, we don't touch these things. This is a new day for the people who study congregation and the people who are concerned for congregation. This is the beginning of a national debate, not if religion is important, but how much it is important. And the $1.2 trillion is an estimate. Personally, I can live with it. I think it's quite conservative. In a work that I did, in a paper that I published this year, we looked at international social development. And we found out that I'm aggregating now that 60% of international social development that come out of the United States is faith-based. Okay? Those numbers are not in the calculation that you saw here. So any which way you look at it, it's a beginning number, and I believe that there will be a discussion by expert and discussion by pundit, and people will talk about it. But in maybe 10 years from now, we'll sit down and say, Brian Grimm was very conservative, too conservative. But we have a number to start with. And it's a good number because if you read the paper, you offer a lower number, a much higher number, and says, I'm sticking with the middle ground. I don't want to go either way. In a way, I look at it as launching a rocket for the first time to a new planet. The rocket is on its way. It will reach a new planet, which is the audience of people in the United States and abroad, who will say, now we can start talking about the value of religion. Many clergy think that if you talk about the value of religion, it's sacrilegious. I say, and I'm a social scientist, the moment we have numbers, we can start discussing and we can talk about real values. And now we can just start a process of improving it and trying to make it even better. I want to make 2 more points, and then I yield the floor. When you hear the number of $1.2 million, you're not talking about a room with the money. It's not in bank account. It's not in investment properties. It's not in fancy artwork. It's not in jewelry. It's money that's being used year after year after year. The cash part of it, the overwhelming majority of it, comes for people who voluntarily give money to religious organization. If you want, it's a personal tax. We all pay our taxes, and in addition, member of congregation either give to their own congregation or to religious causes that they believe in, money out of the pocket, year in, year out. What happened with this money? It's helped local economies. It's, as Professor Grimm said, most of it is being spent locally. So just to make it a little clearer, in our study of a small number of congregations, but quite representative, we found out that our average congregation and their local related owned organization employs 5 people full-time and 7 people part-time. If you take this number and multiply it by the number of congregation, you're talking 1.5 million position, full-time positions. Imagine what happened if everybody tomorrow in America will wake up like me and said, I'm not religious, I don't want to join a congregation. We'll have 1.5 million people full-time unemployed, and another, probably the same number of people who work on few part-time jobs unemployed. This is a huge volume. You don't have many companies or any that employed 1.5 million people in this country. So I applaud this work, and I hope that many people in my field will come and say, we want to challenge it. We want to do better work to prove Professor Grimm right, wrong, in the middle, and improve our knowledge about it. But we enter the new era, and thank you.
Well, as we say in your nation's capital, I associate myself with my colleagues' remarks. For those of you who don't know of Ram Kanan's work in this area, he's not just a researcher in the field, he is the principal researcher in the field, and the modesty of his presentation belies the impressiveness of his reputation in this area. You should know that he's the director of the program for religion and social policy research at the University of Pennsylvania, which is the go-to place. If you make your way through Brian Grimm's bibliography and do nothing more than read the 3 contributions from Dr. Kanan and colleagues cited there, trust me, you will be way up the learning curve in this area. I say all of this to emphasize that what he just said about this paper as a point of departure for a long overdue debate should be given very great weight by everybody in this room and everybody who may be listening or exposed to his remarks. By contrast, I'm an interloper, and so I'll offer a small set of impressions. To begin at the end, I think that Brian Grimm and Ram Kanan are absolutely right to focus on the mid-case estimate. You might call it the Goldilocks estimate. In social science, one of the first questions you ask yourself is an intuitive question, namely, is this a credible number? Well, let me put it this way. If somebody had said that religion indirectly or directly contributes 70% of America's GDP, my intuitive reaction would have been, there's something wrong with that number, right? If somebody had said that religion contributes 7/10 of 1% to America's GDP, I would have said intuitively, that can't be right. That number is much too small. But if somebody says to me, religion contributes on the order of 7% of America's GDP, I would say, well, that might be a good point estimate or a not so good point estimate, but it's in the ballpark, right? Well, $1.2 trillion happens to be about 7% of America's GDP. So it is a sensible number to use as a baseline, it seems to me, for a national discussion. And the fact that this middle case estimate is based in no small measure on Dr. Kanan's pioneering work on the halo effects of religious congregations and activities does nothing to weaken my confidence in it as a point of departure. Now, for a few remarks in my own name, when I first read this paper, I said to myself, if Alexis de Tocqueville had gone to graduate school in modern quantitative sociology, he might have written this sort of thing and included it as an appendix to Democracy in America. My second reaction was that if he'd gone to a modern graduate school in quantitative sociology, he never would have written Democracy in America, because he would have been told that he would never be hired on the basis of such a sprawling, unsystematic work, and certainly never get tenure on the basis of it. So, thank God for the 19th century. Now, I asked myself, since I'm an amateur in this area, well, what would be the ideal methodology in this area? The absolute best case. Absolute best case is that you run a controlled experiment of 2 Americas. One America with religious individuals and congregations and activities and associated organizations, private and public and nonprofit as we know them, and the other America with that module just pulled out, single variable, religion. That, of course, is ridiculous. We can't do that. We can do it imaginatively, and there's a very famous film that's based on exactly that premise. It's called It's a Wonderful Life. You've all seen it, right? And so, that's the ideal methodology because, Clarence, a guardian angel grade 2 who's bucking for promotion comes down to earth, and his mission is to convince Jimmy Stewart that he's added considerable value, to the lives of the people in his community. And lo and behold, by presenting Pottersville with and without Jimmy Stewart, we can see exactly what his value added is. And so, he decides not to commit suicide, but to go back and continue the fight for virtue and community, which he ends up winning. Well, we can't do that. And so we can't randomly assign people to faith-based congregations or not. So we can't, all of the 5-star methodologies that social scientists can imagine are not available in the case of this real-world study. And so we do our best. And one consequence of doing our best is that there's always room for methodological debate. And, some people might say, well, these are sort of gross numbers, but isn't it the net that matters? Isn't it the value added that matters? So if there weren't all these faith-based institutions of higher education, wouldn't there be public sector institutions to take up the slack? Can you really say that this is the net contribution? We could argue that one. On the other hand, there are some things missing from the balance sheet because there's the inherent difficulty of putting an economic value on indirect effects, right? I suspect that that the levels of crime, particularly in economically hard-hit communities, would be measurably higher were it not for the impact of faith-based institutions. And similarly with various sorts of economic and chemical dependencies. As a number of people who've studied social capital point out, community itself makes a contribution to individual and collective well-being. And faith-based communities are one essential building block of community in a neighborhood writ large. Similarly for effective parenting. And what about the quality of life measured in such things as health, longevity, and even, dare I say, happiness? So this is, to conclude, it seems to me, a field in which these methodological questions are now squarely on the table, but every serious debate in social science, and indeed in public life, has to begin with a provocation, has to begin with an initial goad to the argument and to the discussion, and I join with Dr. CNAAN in believing that this paper is that goad, and now, let the debate begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. So thank you both for your comments, and we'll open for some questions. If anyone's written a question, you can pass them up. And if no one's written a question, you can raise your hand. Yeah.
Dr. Grimm, could you please address the others would take up the slack question when it comes to these numbers? Why would or wouldn't others rush in to take the place of faith-based organizations, and was there an attempt to measure that or control for that? Or is that possible in this paper?
Yeah, I certainly within American society and any society, there's many organizations that do good, and they're not just faith-based. So you can have organizations that are not faith-based, and so there's many people that participate in those organizations. I think the difference is that there's a significant higher amount of volunteering when you look at highly religious people and giving. So rather than everything disappearing, I don't think we would see all of the good of society disappearing, but it would be, I think, significantly less.
I'd like to sort of pick up on that question and salute my friend Ram CNAAN for this extraordinary work that he began in the mid-90s, working with John DiUlio. One of the on this individual's question, used as a case study, and I think Dr. CNAAN's right, the inner cities. If you monetize the voluntary labor of all of the people in all these faith-based communities, and I know from personal experience, the secular cavalry is not coming. We did a bunch of field work in the mid-90s in Boston with faith-based organizations working on gangs. And the remarkable thing is that none of the secular left showed up in any of the cities where the crack thing exploded. There was a national demonstration project that PPV did. And one of the other things, just in terms of how you quantify this, if you monetize the amount of money that is saved because faith-based institutions help reduce crime, and you quantify the cost of the crime, the numbers would go up significantly. And I don't know of anyone, and this is about other folks stepping in. The thing that was remarkable in the 90s is that when the crack thing exploded, the left evacuated.
Good.
South side of Chicago, all these ghettos, the faith-based ones, those storefront churches were the only ones left.
Yeah, thank you. And could you identify yourself for everyone else in the room?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Reverend G. Rivers from Boston.
Good.
I'm a student of Ram Kanaan.
Thank you. Yes, Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook.
Susan Johnson Cook, Dr. Brim, thank you so much for your work, and thank both of you for your contributions. Bill Galston, we worked together at DPC.
I remember it well.
Yes. So how would you relate policy to this discussion, since you have such a background in this?
Well, almost everything that Dr. Grimm, Dr. Kanaan have studied has taken place without benefit of what I'll call affirmative policy. Most of it now, obviously, some faith-based organizations receive significant funding from the federal government to do the kind of work that the government judges these organizations do better than secular bureaucracies. So there is a policy component, but mainly it seems to me, policy in the United States in this area is designed to create a permissive environment for faith-based and other voluntary activities. What that suggests to me is that some version of the Hippocratic Oath be applied to policy in this area. First, do no harm. That is, do not adopt policies with the intention or result of making work in this area more difficult. And I think that applying that metric will lead policymakers in the right direction more often than not. But if you ask me, do we need a lot more affirmative policy in this area? Boy, I think the government already has more than enough on its plate, and I'm not sure I would recommend that.
Started with this research, and you kind of set out with this goal, as we've been talking about, to put evaluation on religion. Kind of jumping off the previous question, what was your kind of intending goal from having this research? Now that we know, I guess, have a ballpark estimate of what religion is worth economically, what's to come from that? What we're supposed to take away from that?
Well, there's two goals. One is just basic information. It's very important to have factual information that can guide policymakers, encourage debate, and social discussion. So that's the first goal. And the second goal was to look at a topic that is often portrayed negatively in the media, and look at the other side. So to bring some balance to the discussion about faith. Certainly, there are atrocities that are carried out, even genocide in the name of religion. Some people carry this out, and that's what makes the news. So the intent was to look at the other side and see if there's something we're missing.
Hi, Brandon Schultz with Christian Post. I wanted to follow up on Dr. Galston's comments. If, in recent days, recent weeks, we've have seen rising antipathy toward religion, recent floods out in California with schools losing their tax-exempt status, other incidents in the marketplace, in the business world. I know this is a big comprehensive study, but if that were to go away, what would you say would be the rough economic impact in the United States?
I'm sorry, if what would go away?
Tax-exempt status for these kinds of religious organizations or even schools that contribute to the economy.
Well, you know, I have two answers to that question, a theoretical answer and a practical answer. Personal answer, I should say. Any economist will tell you as a theoretical matter, if you tax something more, you are very likely to get less of it. Okay? On the other hand, I ask myself the following question. I'm a member of a congregation. I've paid my dues now for nigh on 35 years, and believe me, they haven't gotten lower during that period, even correcting for inflation. But if I ask myself, if I didn't get a deduction or an exemption, for that contribution, would I stop making it? No, I certainly wouldn't. So I think when you take the motives of people of faith, the motives for participating in congregations, et cetera, it's not clear to me that they would be as affected in the negative as economic theory might suggest, because economic theory is famously based on homo economicus, and homo religiosus is not homo economicus, thank God. Right.
Ron, do you want to add anything?
Just for the question of what to do with it. One, in my many interaction with clergy, with religious leader, they always lack confidence. They're always somewhat apologetic. And when I did study about the social contribution of congregation, clergy told me, thank you. You enable us to come and say that what we do together is extremely important. Those numbers, I believe that every clergy should go on a weekend, whichever day people worship, and say, look, we here and the rest of us in America are so big and so important. Let's be proud of ourselves. Let's not be apologetic anymore. And I think this is a boost of confidence to many people across America. Mm-hmm. And I'd like it to, I wish I could have gone to every place and tell people, be proud. You're part of something very big and very important. I can do it. Brian Graham took it way further than I could have made it, so I'm impressed.
If I can add a word to that, I've had an oddly checkered life, but I've spent a portion of it in 6 presidential campaigns and 1 presidential administration. And I have found that senior officials distinguish pretty sharply between feel-good rhetoric on the one hand and actual substance on the other. They are not, they are not immune to the charms of feel-good rhetoric, believe me. As a matter of fact, if you screened all of that out, speeches would be a lot shorter than they typically are. But if you're, having had the faith portfolio in a White House, it's hard to get a lot of airtime. It's thought to be nice and occasionally inspiring, but how serious is it really? How important is it really? How does it fit into the social and economic policy goals, of a busy president, a busy chief of staff, a busy assistant to the president for domestic policy or what have you? So you need a credible calling card to get in the door. And work like this, I think, makes it more likely that these questions will be taken seriously in the corridors of power.
Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Timothy Shaw, congratulations to you, Brian, and thank you very much, Dr. Galston and Professor Canaan, for your remarks. I wanted to ask, there are lots of studies, and I think Professor Canaan referred to studies that measure the impact of religion on health, on longevity, mental health, physical health. There was a study in JAMA Internal Medicine just a few months ago, which I'm sure you're familiar with, by Tyler Vanderweel, among others, at the School of Public Health at Harvard, which measured very impressively the impact of participation in religious services on the longevity of women, and argued that the impact has to do not just with participating in a community, but participating in a community that is religious, so that there's something distinctive about the contribution of the religious nature of the community to the health and longevity of women in particular. Does your estimate take into account this sort of impact? This would be hard to monetize, I would imagine. And if it doesn't, do you have thoughts about what taking this kind of impact into account would have on the sort of estimate that you've done?
Yeah.
To hear your response, Brian, and also Professor Canaan.
That's a great question. And if I can self-point out what I think is the weakest part of the study is the section on faith-based health institutions, because there is not a good estimate of the impact just on the health programs of what a religion-related hospital does compared to others. So, and that's a matter of debate. So on the health side, that is one thing. So in our estimate, we just use the revenues of the largest faith-based health systems in the U.S. as the value, and I think that's an underestimate. So I think in the future, that's one area that needs more study, both on the health institutions and then what you're saying, the individual impact on people. And I think that just from participating, and I think that's a whole field of study that really is underway, but really needs more work. Thanks for pointing it out.
Which raises a very interesting question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Raises a very interesting question. As you know, some very recent demographic work has highlighted the astonishing decline of life expectancy among lower income white Americans, and particularly women. Now, these typically are from areas that are predominantly, if not almost exclusively, Christian, usually evangelical Christian. But these studies have gone on to point out that there's a big gap between identifying yourself as Christian and being a member of a faith-based community. And so it's not the simple identification that makes the difference. If it were, we wouldn't be seeing these kinds of very alarming and troubling statistics. And the sociology on people like this finds that they are functionally unchurched, right? And so I think the focus, and I think this is one of the advantages of the congregational approach that a portion of this paper focuses on, is by definition you're talking about people who have a more than nominal self-identification with a particular faith. You're talking about some level of participation, and I think that's critical.
I'm afraid that I'm going to bore many of you, but I'm an academician, so what can I do? Harold Quinn from Duke School of Medicine published 2 books that size, 1990 to 2000 and 2000 to 2010, about studies that show the importance and contribution of faith and religious participation in health and mental health. Each one, and I'm not exaggerating, is that thick. And there are hundreds of studies that show that any version of participation in religion reduce morbidity, health recovery from surgeries and illnesses faster, and increase longevity. Now, how to quantify it into what we are doing here? I'll need another 6 months to think about it.
Any other questions?
My name is Sheila. I work as a research intern at Center for Islam and Religious Freedom, and thanks for your great presentation. And I wonder if your model can apply to other countries as well, because I'm originally from Japan, and Japanese government strongly believe that religious belief creates a lot of divisions, and that's why historically Japanese government overstepped in religion. And they believe that Japanese economic miracle was possible because of our social unity without having religious division in the country. So I'm asking, do you believe your model can be applied to other countries as well? Or?
Yeah, good, very good question. If I can speak about your neighbor instead of Japan, China, there's a recent study by some economists from Shanghai that looked at economic development in towns throughout China, and they found a significantly higher level of economic development in areas where there were large clusters of congregations. Especially Christian congregations. And so then they found that connection. So I think the principle works. I mean, of course, China is half the country is religiously inactive or unaffiliated. About half the country, according to Pew Research statistics, is religiously affiliated. So I think China would be a great next study to see the impact. So I think this same principle can work, really in any country. So I think our time is up. I'm happy to stay afterwards for any other discussion or questions. But thank you all for your interest, and spread the news about the study if you can. Thank you. Thank you.